Fox News alert. President Trump is about to have lunch with members of the Senate Finance Committee as lawmakers return to Capitol Hill with a packed agenda. Tax reform at the very top of the list. This is Outnumbered. I'm Sandra Smith, and here today, Harris Faulkner, host of Hannity on Fox Business, Hannity, Democratic strategist and Fox News contributor Jessica Tarlov, and today's hashtag One Lucky Guy, former Trump Hispanic Advisory Council member and Fox News contributor Steve Cortez is here, and he is outnumbered. And welcome back to everybody on the couch. Happy Thanksgiving weekend to everyone.
Happy everything.
Happy Cyber Monday. And happy Cyber Monday. Get off your no smartphone shopping.
Happy spending money on gifts.
Gifts.
And Sandra, I'm happy to be outnumbered today. I'm outnumbered. I've been outnumbered my entire life. I grew up with 4 sisters.
Oh, yes.
So very
that's a talk show.
Accustomed to this setting. I have a wife and 3 daughters.
Wow.
So I am regularly told by 4 women what the heck to do. Okay, so I anticipate that's what's going to happen here in this hour.
But I met you don't always listen.
But not always.
All right, and as they probably used to say, all right, get to work.
Right.
Let's start. President Trump is about to have lunch with several members of the Senate Finance Committee. They'll likely be talking tax reform ahead of a crucial vote in the Senate. The Washington Post reporting the Senate is discussing some potential changes to its plan to appease a few senators on the fence. Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina is sounding optimistic.
Failure is not an option when it comes to the Republican Party cutting taxes to every Republican senator. The fate of the party's in our hands, as well as that of the economy. The economy needs a tax cut, and the Republican Party needs to deliver, so I think we'll get there.
President Trump tweeting, back in D.C., big week for tax cuts and many other things of great importance to our country. Senate Republicans will hopefully come through for all of us. The tax cut bill is getting better and better. The end result will be great for all. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is staying on top of it all for us from Capitol Hill. Mike, good afternoon.
Sandra, good afternoon to you. A big development on tax reform as Kentucky Senator Rand Paul says he supports the Senate plan. Quote, I have fought for and received major changes for the better, and I plan to vote for this bill as it stands right now. I urge my colleagues to do the same. I urge you, their constituents, to make sure they hear from you. Some senators to watch as leadership works to get to 50 yes votes: John McCain, Jeff Flake, Susan Collins, Ron Johnson, and Bob Corker. Remember, GOP leadership can only afford 2 Republican no's and still pass tax reform.
We're still working through all the final aspects of it, Brian, but I can't imagine we're not going to support this at the end as a whole and as the Senate. I'm still working on some specific parts of it, what I call a debt backstop to be able to make sure that that's in place and other aspects of it. But this will get done. We have got to get this done for the nation.
President Trump tweeted about it earlier. The tax cut bill is coming along very well. Great support with just a few changes, some mathematical. The middle class and job producers can get even more in actual dollars and savings. And the pass-through provision becomes simpler and really works well.
We feel like all senators are looking to try to get to yes on the Republican side. We're obviously disappointed that we don't have Democrat members looking to provide tax relief for middle-income families and for corporate relief so we can bring jobs back into this country. That's probably our biggest obstacle.
A top Senate Democrat from a high-tax state, Illinois, does not sound impressed.
Tax breaks for the wealthiest people in America and the biggest corporations. Meanwhile, the tax breaks for working families, half of them will see a tax increase, half a tax break. Those disappear, as Senator Graham just mentioned. But the tax breaks for the wealthiest people are permanent.
Finally, the Congressional Budget Office estimates the Senate plan would increase the deficit by $1.4 trillion over the next decade. The Senate had budgeted $1.5 trillion, so they've got a little wiggle room if they need to negotiate a bit in the coming days. Sandra?
All right, Mike Emanuel live on Capitol Hill for us. Steve Cortez on the couch. And I wanted to point out to our audience that while you're heavy into politics these days in the Trump administration and otherwise, you have a huge business background, and I know you've had an opportunity to look at these numbers. First of all, do you like what is being presented to the American people as far as tax reform and tax cuts?
Right. Sandra, I do like it. I don't love it. I wish it were more aggressive, particularly on the individual side. And I don't like that a lot of, by the way, Senator Durbin, who's my senator, I live in Chicago, couldn't be more wrong. A lot of high-income people, particularly if they live in places like here, like New York, or places like Illinois and California, are actually going to see their taxes go up.
Yep.
I don't want that to happen to anyone in America. I think everyone's taxes should go down. But having said that, I have some small problems with the tax bill. or the proposal. On the whole, I think it's fantastic. It's so pro-growth. On the business side, and I think that's where we need to see the most impetus in America. Small business has really been hampered by massive regulation and by onerous taxation. That has to end. The regulatory part, Donald Trump, and he doesn't get enough attention for this, enough respect, I think, for this, unfortunately, has already done what he can on the regulatory relief side, and it's been emancipating, really, to small business in America. Now we need to take away the confiscatory tax structure.
But we don't even know if they're firm on that drop in the corporate tax rate, right? I mean, Susan Collins has indicated that she thinks that dropping it to 20% is too low. So we don't even know where that's going to end up.
Come on, Susan. She can't be nitpicky about every single thing. And I agree, they're not firm. They're about as firm as oatmeal on freshly cooked, not the kind that's been hardening in the pot for several hours. But and that's unfortunate because they really need to just look at what things will most dramatically boost the economy. Lowering the tax rate, of course, that's number one. But also, as several Republican senators have pointed out, you need to raise that pass-through rate for small businesses. And, go ahead. How about a big tax cut for the highest bracket? Who cares? Tax cuts for everyone. And, we've talked about this several times. There are some issues, of course, with certain provisions. Susan Collins, she, again, this picky and fickle mistress. She's nervous, has the yips about the $10,000 property tax deduction because it may cost Republicans $100 billion over the next 10 years. If you want to offset that, don't worry about more taxes and raising taxes on the other side. Why don't you cut spending to offset that?
Jessica?
Well, I'm sure there are Republicans who would like to cut spending, but we will stand in your way at any cost. Susan Collins
you said it out loud.
I've said that like a million times. That's totally fine.
Yeah, but Democrats are the ones who are howling about the deficit right now, which is hysterical.
Too. But Susan Collins' big issue is with the repeal of the individual mandate. I mean, yes, she's talking about the 10,000, but at the end of the day, if the individual mandate gets...
What doesn't she have an issue with?
Well, I think generally it's a terrible plan, so I agree with her that she has this many issues, and I appreciate you admitting that there's more to be done on the individual rate. If Republicans didn't want Democrats to message and go to the mats on why isn't there an individual cut of the size that it should be, and you're going to rely on trickle down, they should have just done it in the first place. And the fact that it goes to 2027, and we have these studies coming out now that we could see up to 50% not actually having their individual rates lowered, is a big problem, not only just on a PR front, but for average Americans, and that's why it's so unpopular.
Down, though, if it were trickle down, you would see the top
rates getting cut is trickle down, though, and this is what's been going on. We have record corporate profits.
That's not trickle down. That's not what trickle down economics is. That does not meet the definition.
Corporations here. I think this is such a crucial point. I don't even like to call them corporate taxes because that sort of evokes that we're talking about, GE.
Well,
right?
that's a shame because we should care about those companies too.
But I'm saying, but they don't pay that rate anyway. All right, they are so sophisticated in the way they manage their finances.
That's a good point.
They don't pay the rate. You know who does pay that rate? The local dry cleaner, the dentist.
Yes.
So it's. I prefer to call it a business tax cut rather than corporate. Because it's not corporate. That's not what we're worried about. And by the way, too, specifically, I think this is so important for minorities. As an Hispanic business isn't growing the way it should be. Why? Because not enough access to capital, confiscatory tax structures, too much regulation. I think once we take those barriers away, what we're going to see happen in minority small business, in all small business in this country, is going to be incredible.
All right, Harris.
Just real quickly, I mean, you mentioned the fact that some of these are going to go away for individuals, these tax benefits, those few people who will feel that long term, but most of it will roll away in a few years. Why not hedge a bet as Republicans and say, you know what, we're not going to make the corporate ones permanent either. Let's make those temporary, give those the same oxygen for 10 years, and let it shake out and prove the ground on how they work.
Right. I think that's a great point, and I wish they would.
And then you don't need as much of a big reach into SALT and a big reach into these other things like the pass-through taxes for small businesses because you'll be paying for less to offset the debt.
No, I think you're right. Although, I do hate the phrase of pay for because I hear that a lot from people on Capitol Hill. It's our money in the first place. We don't
I hear what you're saying, but the bigger point that I'm making is why don't you make it equal for everybody so that they expire or roll out or do whatever they do.
Because what's permanent anyway in Washington, D.C. So,
well, anything can be permanent. So try to get rid of the IRS.
Well, in terms of tax cuts, at least.
So we're left with that question. Will it get done? It's going to be a big week for sure. New developments, meanwhile, in the sexual harassment allegations rocking Congress. Senator Al Franken breaking his silence, saying he's ashamed and embarrassed as he heads back to work. Plus, even more accusers coming forward as Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi rejects calls for Congressman John Conyers to resign. She says the Ethics Committee should judge him.
We are strengthened by due process. Just because someone is accused, and was it one accusation? Is it two? I think there has to be. John Conyers is an icon in our country.
But some fellow Democrats don't appear to be on board. They say the system is broken.
I'm not really sure the ethics process as it exists right now is appropriate to deal with these issues.
We come in with a Fox News alert now. Big developments for two lawmakers caught up in sexual misconduct scandals. Congressman John Conyers has stepped down as the top Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee. Senator Al Franken returned to work for the first time since 4 women accused him of groping. In an interview, Senator Franken says the allegations have been embarrassing, but he's rejecting calls to resign.
I'm someone who, hugs people. And I've learned from these stories that in some of these encounters I've crossed a line. I know I have a long way to go in terms of regaining the trust of people that I've let down. And I know that isn't going to happen. That's not going to happen overnight. There aren't any magic words I can say.
In the House, Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi waved off demands for Congressman Conyers to step down.
We are strengthened by due process. Just because someone is accused, and was it one accusation? Is it two? I think there has to be. John Conyers is an icon in our country. He has done a great deal to protect women, Violence Against Women Act, which the right wing is now quoting me as praising him for his work on that, and he did great work on that.
Woo! Twitter lit up with fire. Pelosi later issued a statement writing in part, "We are all at a watershed moment on this issue. And no matter how great an individual's legacy, it is not a license for harassment. I commend the brave women coming forward." Oops. Congressman Conyers says he looks forward to vindicating himself before the House Ethics Committee. Again, he stepped away from House Judiciary because he said he didn't want to have a conflict of presence, I suppose. I'm paraphrasing him there.
Yeah.
Jessica, did you see Twitter on Pelosi?
I did.
It was
even liberal
whooping.
Twitter was unhappy. The follow-up statement should have been what she said on Meet the Press, that there's no excuse for this. If Democrats want to maintain the high ground on this issue, which is something that we pride ourselves on, we say that we are the party for women, that our policies are better for women, and that well, you can laugh, but we say that. That's
sure
what
do.
she would have led with. It puts her in a terrible position when there are a lot of people who think
Why do you think she'd say something like that? I mean,
I think she's known John Conyers a long time. I think there's a mutual respect there. They've been colleagues. I think it was a mistake. It puts the Franken situation into more of a precarious position as well to have done that. And we were talking about this before we started. At the end of the day, John Conyers used office funds to pay
$27,000
to settle
taxpayer funds.
You can get rid of him on that basis.
But do you remember his rationalization of that? Well, it wasn't millions.
Right.
Remember that?
You said she's known him a long time. I think this is important to point out. Outside of these allegations about John Conyers, he was elected 50 years ago. Okay?
Yeah.
He's not a swamp creature. He's a swamp fossil. I mean, he probably had to take the train to Washington, D.C. when he got elected because there were no planes
we don't
when
need
he
to
got
make
elected. We cannot have people.
Well, he's the longest-serving member of all of Congress.
We need
but Orrin
term
Hatch
limits.
is 83. Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of
and
old
I'd
people
like him
running
term
around.
limited. I'd like him term limited as well.
So what this brings up
we
to
need
me,
fresh.
Kennedy, is just kind of that freshness that you hear even within the Democratic Party for message, for people.
I think this narcissistic predatory behavior knows no party and it knows no age. And I think people who prey on victims are lured by the prospect of power, whether it be law enforcement or politics or, working for a church youth group or being an offensive coordinator in major football, college football
U.S. gymnastics
organizations.
coach.
Exactly right. A U.S. gymnastics coach, doctor. The point is this personality type, they're drawn to these positions, and that's what we have to look after. I mean, we have to look for these vulnerable victims who are terrified about speaking. And now we're at a watershed moment because there are so many victims coming forward who are saying, I had the exact same thing happen to me. What is inappropriate is the response like that. It is blaming the victim. It's people like Lena Dunham. It's people all over the place who protect their person because they happen to be of the same political party. It has nothing to do with party.
What's interesting is just that is Al Franken he's back to work today.
Yeah,
It's just a
and
statement
hoping this
he's
goes away with a
embarrassed.
Well, and also
stupid statement
Senator-
in magical words.
this
The
does
magical
put
words for him could be, I resign.
I think Jessica put it this way, Steve, in a much more precarious position too, Al Franken.
Right. Well, and listen, here's the other thing. Republican or Democrat, the fact that the Congress constructed for itself a secret mechanism to confidentially use taxpayer money to pay off the victims of sexual harassment is, to me, almost unbelievable. It's hard for me to think less of the Congress, and I do think less after this revelation.
I mean, when
that
you
they
hear-
used our money to harass victims, silence them, and then pay them off with taxpayer money.
When you hear Al Franken say, I'm someone who hugs people, and then you see kind of the, we'll see what happens.
We should all hug less professionally.
I'm not touching that. Meanwhile, prominent female lawmakers and business leaders on both sides of the political aisle are demanding swift action against sexual harassment, saying the system does not protect the victims.
That whole process is designed to protect politicians, Democrats and Republicans alike, to protect the institution and to make it next to impossible for a woman, or in some cases, a young boy page, to come forward.
The media and the corporate America has been firing people. We have to have the same kind of standards when credible people come forward.
I think it was a system set up in 1995 to protect the harasser. This is not a victim-friendly process.
Congresswoman Jackie Speer, along with New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, introduced legislation earlier this month that would overhaul policies to report sexual harassment on the Hill. So you were just saying we should hug a lot less. I'm talking about personal responsibility. That's where I stopped there. I wanted to get to this point, and that's kind of where you were going to, Steve.
Yeah, you know what it reminds me of, too? And I say this as a Catholic. It reminds me a lot of the Catholic Church. I think at first, rather than transparency, rather than honesty about its problem with sexual harassment.
Well, and it was forced upon the
boys,
church.
Right.
I mean,
and it paid an incredible price, both literally and figuratively, right? And it's standing financially and otherwise. I think we need a similar kind of reckoning now, it seems, on Capitol Hill. And unfortunately, it's being forced upon them, too. They're not doing it at their own volition.
So, Kennedy, what does disinfectant look like with regard to this?
That's a really good question. And the thing is that's really uncomfortable for everyone involved in this, and right now it's everyone on Capitol Hill, that is one thing that has to be bipartisan. You cannot have one reaction for one side and another for your own. That is unacceptable and inappropriate. Enough of these rationalizations. But you're absolutely right about the personal responsibility, because people who come forward as victims on Capitol Hill, they're the ones who are sent to sensitivity training. They're the ones who are essentially sent to purgatory before they are allowed to come forward and make any sort of claim. And not just a financial claim, but where is the responsibility there? Because as we have seen, if someone is accused of something, an angry mob goes after their sponsors. Right. And then that person is unceremoniously taken off the air. But there's no mechanism like that for elected officials, and there absolutely has to be.
But it's not an easy answer, and that's the problem, right?
Yeah.
Nobody's got an easy, fast solution to this problem. And the fact that there could be an avalanche of revelations still to come, they're going to be dealing with this in real time. And that's hard, right? Because they're going to have to be coming up with things on the fly, because the system has not been set up right.
And Senator, I would say this too. The other point that I really take issue with Pelosi is when she said due process. Of course there's due process, and there are false accusations. He had due process, though. These claims were paid. Now, it was in secret. I don't like that. But there was a process that was adjudicated, right? And the claims were paid. Because, by the way, if he agreed to pay these claims, or have the taxpayer, I should say, pay those claims, and they weren't valid, well, then that was an atrocity. He should never have allowed that.
But there are people, I mean, we talked about this last week on the couch, that there are claims that get settled in all industries, corporate politics, where they pay, but with no admission of guilt.
Sure.
So then that's what he's claiming happened here.
No contest payment.
Exactly. Yeah. So we have to keep that in mind. I agree with you. I think Nancy Pelosi completely fumbled this. But I want to return to...
Wait. No contest payments with taxpayer dollars?
No.
Different.
I think John Conyers should resign. I'm not saying that. I'm saying he didn't admit guilt.
Admission of guilt.
Right. But what I wanted to say on the hug front, I was really taken by the story of the woman who said, the first accuser of Al Franken, who said that they took a photo op together, the first one. She said she had also taken a picture with another congressman that day who had asked her before the picture was taken, where would you like me to put my hand? Would you like me to put my hand on your shoulder or on your waist? And that was something that I thought was incredibly thoughtful. I hadn't heard that before. And you know that people
gentlemen do that.
Gentlemen do that. But the point is that we need to all be, if you don't want to be lumped in with these people who do things like grab butts, be sensible, be polite, and be thoughtful. No, well, because we talk about butt grabbing.
Okay, but also, Jessica, I think this is important. Also,
I just wanted to include you.
Al Franken's accuser says that his tongue was down her mouth. All right, that doesn't happen from a hug. I mean, this is something more nefarious.
Let's leave it there, shall we? Because we'll circle back to this conversation, I'm sure, eventually. Coming up on Outnumbered Overtime, I will talk live with one of the Congressman Conyers' accusers. Melanie Sloan will join me. She's an attorney who worked with the House Judiciary Committee. She says back in the 1990s, the congressman publicly berated her and also called her to his office and was in his underwear when she arrived. Keep it right here atop the next hour for that overtime. Confusion and protesting erupting as the White House responds to a move by Obama appointees to keep control of a critical federal agency. New details on the memo that just went out to federal workers on this. And Democrats forcing a showdown over immigration. They may shut down the government on this topic. We'll talk about it. Stay close.
Fox News alert: a government shutdown is looming as lawmakers try to hammer out a deal to fund the government. The current spending bill expires next month. Many Democrats are saying they will only vote to fund the government if the spending package includes a fix for DACA. That's the Obama-era plan that protects immigrants who came to the United States illegally as children. Their protected status is set to lapse next year. Senator Dick Durbin, a Democrat from Illinois, and Republican Senator Lindsey Graham both think lawmakers could include a fix.
I'm not prepared to go home for the holidays until we get our work done. We believe, the DREAM Act, Senator Graham and I believe we can put together a bipartisan coalition to pass it and make that part of the end-of-year effort.
I'm not going to vote for a spending bill that doesn't dramatically increase defense spending. The DREAM Act, I think you could get strong border security and a break in chain migration. If you could put those three things together and put it on the bill, that'd be a heck of an accomplishment.
Republicans are against tying an immigration fix to the spending bill. Senator John Thune of South Dakota is one of them.
I don't think that ought to be in this bill. This bill ought to be about funding the government. DACA is a big issue. Immigration is a big issue. There's a lot of sympathy for assisting those young men and women who are in this country through no fault of their own, who are here illegally through no fault of their own, at the same time doing something about border security. We think those issues need to be coupled. But that's a big issue. That is a consequential legislative issue that needs to be dealt with, but it shouldn't be dealt with in the context of a year-end spending bill.
Let's go first to the Lindsey Graham idea, right? DACA could make it in if there was concessions to border security, like building the wall, for example.
No, and Senator, I think that makes perfect sense. I think Senator Thune is exactly correct. The idea that you put this in as sort of an afterthought, a one sentence within a budget bill is ludicrous. This is an immigration issue. I agree, and I disagree, quite frankly, with a lot of people in the White House and a lot of people on Team Trump who don't want DACA extended. But I think the president, thankfully, is more in my line of thinking. We do want DACA extended. These people did not choose to break our immigration laws. They were brought here as children. It's a different category of illegal immigrant. However, there's no reason that the president should extend that permanent or make it permanent without some concessions coming back the White House's way, mainly more resources for the border and an end to chain migration. Those have to happen.
Having been on the Hispanic Council for Mr. Trump, then candidate, no doubt you've talked to the president about this issue. What happens if we do nothing? And that's part of the conversation Republicans could be having right now, right?
No, I think what happens is these people are in limbo because, let's be honest, we're not going to round them up and deport them. We're just not, right? We don't have the political will to do that. It's not the right thing to do.
So what does happen?
What happens is they're in limbo, and it puts them in a precarious situation as far as working. And I think that's the most deleterious part of doing nothing. So we want them working. We want them in school. This is good for our country. But again, too, the president, I think, he gets no credit for the compassion that he showed, because many people within his White House argued the other way. I was able to thankfully make the case directly to the president of why I think it's important to try to make this permanent. But I also told him we need to get things in return. We need the wall, and we need an end to sanctuary
And I'm
cities.
sure he agreed with you
and we need an end to chain migration.
He agreed with you on that. All right, Jessica?
I think actually this is a great opportunity for Democrats to speak to an issue that I think was integral to why we lost in 2016, which is border security. Now, I wouldn't go with the Donald Trump is compassionate on this issue perspective. He's more nuanced, I think, than a lot of Republicans on it. You know, the border wall thing and I'm going to deport everyone is not compassionate. But if Democrats came to the table and dealed like what we had in the Gang of Eight bill, saying we're going to send, thousands more troops, border security guards to the border. Let's talk about chain migration. Let's talk about more deportations certainly of criminals. Talk about sanctuary city policies.
By the way, the money's already allocated for that.
Right.
Spend it. We saw Ralph Northam reversed himself on sanctuary cities in the Virginia race, and he still won.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's really smart. I do think that we need to address DACA as soon as possible, and that's why I think the spending bill is fine. But Democrats should deal here because then we can say at the election, we came to the table on this and we heard you that you're scared about the border.
I think this should be the first part in two parts of comprehensive immigration reform. And, I think you could get bipartisan support both for saving the DACA program and border security. And this is where Democrats are being really hypocritical, to your point, because you can't just throw open the borders and have people come in and join entitlement state. Right. There's no faster way to make a country go broke.
You guys are working it out over
here. By the way, Kennedy, to that point.
The two of you, are you listening?
This is crucial.
Awesome.
And as pro-immigrant as I am, and I'm the son of an immigrant, so is Donald Trump, by the way. A lot of people don't know that. As pro-immigrant as I am, we're not doing immigration right.
No, but that's the second part of the two-part plan. So the first part is fix DACA, fund border security, not the wall, because that's a big waste of money. It's not necessarily going to work. But then after that, you have to fix immigration.
Half of immigrant-headed households in America are receiving welfare. That is an atrocity. That cannot happen. We need merit-based.
And the other half are starting businesses.
Yes.
And that's what we have
more
to
of those.
Amen.
No merit-based.
All right. Well, we are awaiting a judge's ruling on the consumer watchdog leadership battle as an Obama-era official is now suing the Trump administration. She's trying to stop the president from appointing his budget chief as new director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, saying doing so violates the law that put the agency into place. It all started when the outgoing chief, Richard Cordray, named a successor last week when he suddenly retired. And now Press Secretary Sarah Sanders pushing back, following word the agency's own lawyer agrees with the administration. Sanders issuing this statement. Now that the Bureau's own general counsel, who was hired under Richard Cordray, has notified the Bureau's leadership that she agrees with the administration and DOJ's reading of the law, there should be no question that Director Mulvaney is the acting director. In the meantime, former Congressman Barney Frank is defending the agency. He co-sponsored the Dodd-Frank law, which created the agency after the 2008 financial crisis. He's praising the agency's track record and taking a shot at the president. Watch.
If you look at the record of the CFPB, I think it is very relevant. There's not a single criticism of a single action they have taken that says they went too far. And the reason, by the way, they want to give examples is they would then have to defend overcharging on credit cards or abusive student loan collections, et cetera. Nothing could be more contradictory to Donald Trump being the friend of the little guy than trying to undermine the most effective agency for the consumer in the financial area we've ever had.
Is it really that effective?
No, in a word. But also here, I think this is the idea of the swamp at work. My favorite Steven Seagal movie was Hard to Kill. Well, the swamp is hard to kill, these creatures. The idea that a bureaucrat thinks that because they resign or retire, that they get to appoint their own successor rather than the president, is an absurdity on its face.
It's supposed to be an independent board, however, but is the board necessary at all? The gum flappery that we just saw from former Congressman Frank, it seems like that board is actually not necessary, and that's a great example of the swamp manifesting as too much needless government.
Right. Look, if you want to look at does the government protect the financial system, look no further than the housing crisis, which I would argue was almost 100% created by too much government insight and intrusion into the mortgage crisis. So, no, does government protect the consumer? Of course not. What it does is it creates a bureaucracy that exists for its own benefit, for its own self-aggrandizement, and does very little for the people it's supposed to serve.
Apparently, Mick Mulvaney showed up with a bag of donuts this morning.
He did, Dunkin' Donuts.
When he showed up for work as the new boss,
a couple of the journalists snapped pictures of that, and one had a caption of, well, maybe this could help. So basically, you had two bosses show up for work, technically, today. I mean, I don't know if the visual was there, but the technicality was. And Leandra English, who's suing over this whole thing, basically to get her seat, which, by the way, none of us owns our seat at work. I'm just saying. But her whole point is that she wants the language change. She wants the Dodd-Frank portion that would protect that office to the director who's outgoing to trump, if you will, the president being able to use the Vacancies Act, right? So she wants this never to even be a part again, so she could slide, or anybody could slide into that seat on an exiting director.
Sounds like cronyism.
Right. Why should we bother with elections
like
then?
Yeah.
I think the most important plank of the argument from the left here and what Barney Frank was saying is the independence that you brought up, that this was designed to protect Americans from any sort of stuff on Capitol Hill. I'm not sure. I mean, Barney Frank makes a good point that there aren't on-the-ground complaints that people are making about it, and I think that he is right to raise this issue right now because we know just a few weeks ago, in the middle of the night, Republicans voted to scale back consumer protections from Wall Street, and we know that Republicans are more a fan of the big banks necessarily than the left is.
That's actually not true at all. Well, you look at a lot of the money that Barack Obama's taken since he's left office.
I'm talking about protections.
The great teeth that Hillary Clinton has suckled on for decades.
No, I'm not talking about speeches and things like that. I'm talking about Wall Street and tax breaks for the rich and things like that.
Those are two completely different.
You know, Jessica, I think those are the talking points on this. But I think the concern from the American people is the consumer, which needs to be the concern when you look at this bureau. Somebody's got to get back to actually protecting the consumer.
Dodd-Frank has hurt consumers. Dodd-Frank has hurt small businesses. Dodd-Frank has only buffeted giant banks who've consolidated by snapping up these community banks that used to give loans to individuals and small businesses.
Mick Mulvaney has said that he thinks this is a silly thing, that it's a joke. Why do you have people in charge of bureaus that do not think they should exist?
I think that's
same at the EPA.
As it is currently structured, Jessica.
The EPA.
Oh, listen, we got to go.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Harris. Saved by the Harris. Roy Moore, still defiant, releasing a new ad today and holding a rally tonight. Some Republicans saying the president should ask Moore to step aside in the face of sexual misconduct allegations. The state of play for a key Senate seat. That's coming up in moments.
Senator Al Franken returning to work today, and we are just getting a warning that he is going to be stepping up to a microphone to speak live at 1 p.m. Eastern time. This is his first appearance back on Capitol Hill since 4 women accused him of groping and unwanted sexual contact. He has since, in an interview, said he's embarrassed and ashamed by his past behavior, and he's pledged to work to regain the trust of women and his constituents. He will be speaking about 15 minutes from now, we're told, at 1 p.m. Eastern time. We will take that live. Senator Franken, when he begins.
Yeah, they'll have a lot to work with. He was giving interviews all over with Minnesota Press yesterday, so this will be interesting. And we'll watch for it. Alabama Senate candidate Roy Moore is remaining defiant in the face of calls to step out of the race following sexual harassment allegations against him. He plans to hold a rally tonight with just 2 weeks and 1 day to go until voters head to the polls. And just today, he released this ad. Here it is.
5 state campaigns, 40 years of honorable service. Roy Moore has been intensely scrutinized and not a hint of scandal. But 4 weeks before the election, false allegations, a scheme by liberal elites and the Republican establishment to protect their big government trough.
A White House official is telling Fox News President Trump says, quote, nothing on his schedule, or has nothing on his schedule at this time in regards to campaigning for Moore. But the president continues to slam Moore's opponent, Doug Jones, posting to Twitter just yesterday, tweeting, the last thing we need in Alabama and the U.S. Senate is a Schumer-Pelosi puppet who is weak on crime, weak on border, bad for our military and our great vets, bad for our Second Amendment, and wants to raise taxes to the sky. Jones would be a disaster. Some Republicans, like Senator John Thune, say they agree with the president, but only up to a point.
He is right. If the Democrat wins, it's going to be a vote for the Pelosi-Schumer agenda. But the other alternative is if Roy Moore wins and he comes into the Senate in January, there's going to immediately be an ethics investigation, which is going to be a cloud that he'll be operating in, and it's going to be a distraction for us and for our agenda. It would be in their best interest and in the country's best interest, and certainly in the best interest of our agenda, if the president would use his influence to try to get Roy Moore to step aside.
Steve?
You know, tough situation here. Boy, do I wish that Jeff Sessions were still a senator from Alabama for a couple of reasons. Number one,
I think they asked him. He didn't want to do it, right? He didn't want to go back?
Number one, I think he's a terrible attorney general. But number two, we wouldn't be in this mess. Well, I do. I think he's been he's completely bungled the Russia.
I don't think you can blame Jeff Sessions for the allegations against Roy Moore.
No,
but okay.
But I'm saying, I think he's done a poor job as attorney general. He should never have recused himself. Hillary Clinton, I think, should be actively investigated already. Those things aren't
That's
happening.
That's the first mention of Hillary today, by the way.
All right, go ahead.
I think those are big mistakes. So I wish he were still the senator. But look, I think the president is playing this as carefully and, to me, as correctly as he can. Can we get wholeheartedly behind Roy Moore? No, that's a pretty tough pill to swallow. But on the other hand, so is Doug Jones, and he doesn't remotely represent the values of Alabama in the Senate. And on top of that, Gorsuch is on the court. Huge win for Donald Trump in the first year. We're very likely going to be able to replace Kennedy on the court in the coming months, perhaps more in the coming years. We need to maintain control of that Senate.
Yeah, so what's interesting about this, too, is that you also have sitting out there is Senator John McCain, who has said not only, just go ahead and let Alabama make the decision, those voters, but not only might you see an ethics investigation into Roy Moore once he gets to the Senate if he wins, you also would see this pushback from John McCain to constitutionally unseat him.
Right. And to that point, too, by the way, I think it would be good to be adjudicated instead of just accusations in the media. For instance, Roy Moore at one point said that he was going to sue the Washington Post over the initial story. I think he should, because then we get there's a standard of evidence.
Closure.
Right. But then there's a standard of evidence. There's depositions. By the way, I think that his accusers should sue him civilly. So that's the way that we get real investigations rather than just innuendo in the media into what the truth truly is. And I'd say that for Roy Moore.
Does it help that the president steps in?
Oh, I think so. Look, the president is hugely popular in Alabama. And the fact that he's not saying a lot in favor of Moore, he's not saying anything in favor of him, but he's saying a lot against Jones, I think that is hugely influential in the state of Alabama.
All right. Jessica?
I think it matters as well. I would say then if you think that people who say they're going to sue news outlets for these stories, then Donald Trump should follow through, and he should sue as well, because he said that he was going to sue everybody when he was accused by 16 women, I believe. If you look at the Real Clear Politics average right now, it's neck and neck. The average, I think Jones has a 0.8 edge. It'll be a turnout game there. I was surprised that the president didn't take the opportunity to say, when this all started breaking, I endorsed Luther Strange. Let's talk about a write-in campaign. Because everyone basically agrees, except Roy Moore, that
other
these
Republicans
are credible.
Have said it, though.
Well, but he could have.
They've war-gamed several strategies, including having Strange drop out, so it would trigger a special emergency election, and inserting Jeff Sessions that way, which I think would have been the best idea strategically from an outside perspective. But I'm an outsider. I'm not from Alabama, and I feel bad for the people in that state because they're put in the position of, in some way, either with their vote or their voice, defending Roy Moore. There are prominent Republicans in that state who've done a really embarrassing job of that, but it's unfortunate that they don't have another alternative at this point.
Well, and without that closure that Steve was talking about, do you run the risk of circumventing the voters of Alabama?
I mean, that's where it is right now. I mean, what are we, 2 weeks away from this election? I mean, time is, the clock is ticking. It's going to be...
I'd love to know, too, your opinion on one thing. I'm not defending Roy Moore because the allegations, I think, seem credible. How do I know? The yearbook photo, though, why will they, or signature, why will they not be turned over?
We got to watch the case.
I think we're
going to see what they do.
Waiting to see if it's going to be subpoenaed.
All right. By the way, Senator Al Franken, we are waiting for him to step to some microphones. We will bring you that live. What will he say? 4 women accusing him of groping and other things. And just at the top of the hour in our coverage, you heard on tape him saying, I'm someone who hugs people. What will he say to the public as we watch him step to the microphones and go live? We'll bring it to you here, right here, on Fox News Channel FNC for the cool kids. Stay close.